So like I was saying, the book is based in the 1800s during the trapping industry. And that's what a lot of people were doing. And the characters in our book, Eli and Curly Bill, they're actually built a cabin in Canada, and they run what's called a trap line. And all that is every mile or so, they place a trap just like this. And when an animal would come along, they'd get caught in the trap. Then Eli or Curly Bill would come, grab that animal, and actually skin it. This was huge industry. This is how they made their money. Beautiful furs like this people would use for clothing, for blankets, all sorts of things. So the part of the book we're going to read, Eli is traveling up his trap line. It runs straight into a place called Beaver Pond. Now Beaver Pond is way bigger than this room. You have to imagine there's a beaver dam growing across the middle. You guys know what a beaver dam is? Okay. You know what it is? All right, good. And in the very middle, right next to that beaver dam, is what's called a Beaver Lodge. Now all a Beaver Lodge is it's kind of circular. It sticks halfway out of the water, halfway in the water. And there's underwater tunnels. You're going to have to remember that. Underneath the water, where the beavers will go up and they'll swim. But beavers have a problem. And after the show, if you want to go check out the big beaver outside, you're going to see that they're kind of bulky, kind of awkward. So they're easy to pick off for predators. Animals that want to eat them. So what beavers do is in the summertime they gather sticks and shrubs, and they stick it in the bottom of the pond. And then when the ice freezes over in the winter, they just hang out underneath the ice. If they need a snack, they dive down to the bottom of the pond, swim up those underwater tunnels like I was telling you, and they just hang out in the den and do whatever a beaver does. What do you think a beaver does?
Eat wood.
Eat wood, that's a good answer. Anybody else? Maybe eat, sleep, raise their young? I don't know, I'm not a beaver, but I'm sure they do lots of things to entertain themselves and stay safe. So Eli knows this. So it's winter out, and he'd have on his beaver hat just like this to stay warm. And he'd walk, when he got to the pond, he'd walk out on the beaver dam. And when he got to the Beaver Lodge, he'd take out his big knife and he'd cut a hole in the top. Then he would set his trap, and when the beaver found out that someone had messed with their home, they'd come up and get caught in the trap. So that's what I want you to picture. Picture him walking out, bent over, setting his trap. There's one thing you got to remember. Even though the pond is frozen, water still runs in between the sticks of the dam. So it's kind of noisy and he's distracted. So that's where we're going to pick up. Chapter 27. As Eli worked on setting the trap inside the Beaver Lodge, the sound of water rushing past him caused him not to be able to hear very well. But he had just set his trap and was admiring the looks of it when he heard a faint crackling noise coming from the dam behind him. His first reaction was to take a moment and formulate a plan. After living in the dangerous woodlands of Canada for some time now, he knew it was better to think first and respond second. He took a deep breath and slowly reached for a six-shooter. He was careful not to drop the gun in the water, for his hands began to shake violently with fear. By now, whatever was approaching behind him on that dam was now within striking distance. Eli froze as he felt heavy breathing on his neck. His nostrils were pulsed by the strong odor coming from behind him. He quickly turned, only to come face to face with a massive, one-eyed grizzly bear. Chapter 28. The bear stood on all four paws and it slowly smelled the air around Eli. He tried to remain as still as possible, hoping the bear's naturally poor eyesight would cause it to lose interest. The bear sniffed the air a few more times before turning around and walking towards the open Beaver Lodge. Eli let out another breath of relief and turned to flee, but his legs had grown numb and fallen asleep, causing him to stumble backwards on the dam. Crack! A branch underneath Eli's foot, drawing the attention of the grizzly bear. The bear veered around and charged towards Eli. Immediately, Eli grabbed again for a six-shooter in order to shoot the bear, causing the bear to become startled and swat Eli across the face with its massive paw. Eli went sprawling backwards into the freezing water. As he slowly descended into the depths of the cold water, he realized that the bear would be waiting for him to surface. A bear that did not hibernate in the winter only meant one thing. It was starving and looking for food. Eli began to panic until he remembered a story Curly Bill had once told him about a pond that had dried up during a drought, causing the Beaver Lodge to become stranded with water. Curly Bill had said that grown men were able to stick their heads up into the house and look around. This Beaver Lodge at Beaver Pond was bigger than any lodge he had ever seen before. And he knew there was a chance that if he swam up one of the underwater passageways, he could hide from the bear in the lodge. Chapter 29. Eli began swimming towards one of the tunnels leading up into the lodge. The water was murky, making it hard to tell if the tunnel was big enough for him to swim up into. When Eli reached the tunnel, he thrust his body towards the opening, but to his dismay, he became stuck. He could not seem to gather the leverage needed to pull himself up into the lodge. His lungs were starting to ache as he slowly suffocated from the lack of air. He reached desperately in the lodge, hoping to find an object to pull himself up with. As he searched, his hands came in contact with a branch sticking out of the side of the wall. Using the last bit of strength he could muster, he pulled himself into the lodge. Eli collapsed on the mound of mud, gasping for air. For a brief moment, he could rest easy, but that luxury was taken away as the bear became aware that Eli was no longer in the water. The bear climbed on top of the lodge and began tearing into the house after him. Eli would crawl to different parts of the lodge after each swipe of the grizzly bear's paw. After several failed attempts, the bear began to sniff into the breathing tube sticking out of the top of the lodge. After sniffing around, the grizzly bear located where Eli was and used his 3-inch claws to continue tearing into the house after Eli. By now, Eli had gathered his strength back, took out his 6-shooter, and stuck it up into one of the holes the bear had made, and prepared to shoot the bear. He waited until the bear stuck its nose in the hole again, and he pulled the trigger. Click. You want to see the picture? Here it is. Can you see that? Chapter 30.